All right. Welcome to another episode of The Close-Up. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron, and today we have an awesome show for you. We had Josh Cohen, Orlando Magic writer and digital content manager for the Orlando Magic. I said that exact same way, Orlando Magic writer and digital content for the Orlando. I said it in my intro to him when we actually talk. It's hilarious. I just love that I say Orlando Magic twice there. Anyways, we have a great conversation with Josh. He has a very, very smart basketball mind. And just looks at the game at a very unique perspective. And I mean, he just understands basketball, like not just as a viewer, but he understands what he's seeing at a deeper level. So it's always a pleasure to have him on the call, on the podcast to discuss the Magic. And we kind of do our season preview. We look at where the Magic struggled and how we think they can evolve this year. We talk about the development of this roster without signing a traditional point guard. We talked about how this offense can get from 22nd best to middle of the pack, leave average, how they can really continue to push the areas that they did succeed in and do even more offensively. It's a really, really good conversation. So I'm looking forward to you all listening to it. Before we get into that conversation with Josh Cohen, let's just get into a couple reminders. This podcast is brought to you by the Believe Podcast Network. We are one of their shows, and we really appreciate all the support they give us. And part of that is by helping us find partners and sponsorships of this program. And that has been for a while now, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything for football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on a 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at a weekly prize and share of $200,000. It's a lot of money, and they do this weekly. That's pretty cool. When the game's over, head over to their online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 different slot machines that you can play. And you can do it on their website or their app. They're both super user friendly. This isn't even in the read. I'm just letting you know right now, like the app and website are both really good, and very clear and straightforward to use. So you could use either one of them. Head over to the website today or the app and get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. In other news, we at HQ, we are also looking at our partnerships going into next seasons, and we're thankful for Bet Online and for the Believe Podcast Network. But if you are a small business owner or someone who works at a small business that is trying to reach a targeted Central Florida audience, we have a great impact and reach on a very large audience in Central Florida, and we'd love to potentially partner with you. Go ahead and email us or DM us. You can email us at admin@orlandomagichq.com or shoot us a DM on one of our social channels or one of the, myself or the founders, Al and Anthony. Feel free to hit us up, and we'd love to talk to you about the potential partnerships we could have with you. And that's it. All right. This is it. We are counting down the weeks until NBA basketball is back. I believe it's like 25 days ish. Maybe by the time you're hearing this, closer to 21, because I pre-recorded this on Monday, September 16th. This is airing later in the week on Friday. Basketball's almost back. Training camp starts at the end of this month. So psyched. Anyways, please enjoy this awesome conversation that we have with Josh Cohen. And thanks again, Josh, for joining the show. All right, everyone, like I said, we got Josh Cohen, the Orlando Magic writer and digital manager for the Orlando Magic, which I've said twice now. Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for spending a little bit of time of your offseason with us. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Steven. Thanks so much again for having me on. I can't believe we're just a couple of weeks away now from Media Day and training camp. Just flies by so fast. It was like yesterday that we were in Cleveland for Game 7, but excited now to get back and start things up again. And of course, should be another awesome year.
Yeah, when the Magic have a successful season like last year and make the postseason, unlike past seasons, it's like the offseason gets a little bit shorter and shorter. Speaking of the offseason, we were having a bit of a conversation and then I like kind of rudely interrupted you. It's like, pause, Josh, we got to actually save this for the podcast. How have you been enjoying your offseason? Have you been able to get out and travel a little bit, or have you stayed more like local in Orlando? What's been that like for you?
Yeah, well, I visit up in New Jersey a few times throughout the summer to see family. Also, the NBA draft is in Brooklyn. So when a draft is there, I get to see family during that time as well. So I'll be there late June, early July is usually how it all plays out. So that was always a good time. And then I was actually recently again in New Jersey, just the last couple of weeks before coming back to Orlando. And then, of course, in July, I went to Las Vegas for Summer League. So that was my other trip. But I didn't take any other like major personal trips. Otherwise, I was in Orlando around that other time. So, but it's always
Nice.
a great opportunity during the different work events. And then, of course, family time as well.
Now remind me, you being like having a lot of family from New Jersey, were you a Nets or a new yeah, were you a Nets fan when they were in New Jersey, or where was your fandom when you were growing up?
Yeah, I went to a lot of New Jersey Nets games when they played at then called Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, which was right near, where the Giants and Jets play, the next door stadium. But I actually was more of a New York Knicks fan. If
Makes
That was
sense.
a team that I paid more attention to as a kid. So, but I went to a lot of Nets games as a kid. I remember going to at least maybe 7 or 8 of them, from what I remember. I remember going to a playoff game. Also, they played the Pacers in the 2002 first round series. I went to Game 2 of that series. I remember that was ended up being a great series. Went 5 games. Game 5 was crazy. Reggie Miller tied the game late in regulation, sent it to overtime. I wasn't at that game, but that was a good series. And
That
I
was the
remember being
series.
that was a series, yeah, that I was at least
That's
for game.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you were up there during the draft time. And what was like your initial thoughts going into draft day? Like, this wasn't on our outline, but I'm thinking of it now. Like, you were there at the draft. Kind of what were you thinking the Magic were going to do? If, did you think they might move up, move out, or just stay put? And then how do you feel about the outcome with drafting Tristan da Silva, which you've also now seen play at Summer League and I'm sure around the gym at the facilities?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not going to say that I knew for certain that they were going to take Tristan da Silva, but he seemed to fit the type of DNA, the type of player that the Magic typically go for as far as length, versatility. And now we know that he really does a good job spacing the floor. He can defend multiple positions. So it's logical now, in hindsight, that that was a player that they were targeting. But I've learned a lot about him over the last couple months, and very impressive player, a high IQ player, and I think he'll fit in right exactly how the Magic need him to fit in going forward.
With him being, a 4-year college student, coming in at 23, just having that higher baseline, what do you think is going to allow him to differentiate himself during times of adversity with the team, with health issues, to like just really plug in and be a someone that is being able to be relied on during, key times of the season for the Magic?
Yeah, I would forget age, honestly, in this scenario, because even if he was 18, 19, as I've gotten to know him a little bit more, I think he's just a mature guy, period, regardless of age. Everything I've heard about when he first came to Colorado, even though he was new to the country, it seemed like he already had a high basketball IQ at that particular point and just continued to brush up on his skills as time went on. Now, of course, he played with some really good players his last year at Colorado. I'm not going to suggest that he's going to come in right away and make a massive impact. But again, going back to the versatility, what we know about him is that he sees the floor really, really well. I don't think he'll ever be a primary playmaker, but I think he's a great connecting piece. The way he spaced the floor in Summer League gives you a lot of confidence that as a threat, as a spot up shooter, particularly off kickouts, I think he could serve a major purpose there right away. And then I don't think he's coming in with the attitude or the mentality that he's going to be asked to be a prolific scorer. We know that that's not really what his function is. It wasn't at Colorado either. So the fact that he didn't have to do that at Colorado, largely because he had a lot of other talent around him there, I think he's well adjusted to handle the new functionality in the pros that he'll have with the Magic.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I didn't do a ton of draft research this year. I kind of just like, I'm just gonna see what happens. And then I'll brush up on them in a deeper way when the selection is actually made. And I did, I knew a little bit about Tristan da Silva going into the draft. I wasn't surprised that they selected him either. But after seeing him play in summer league and watching more of his tape at Colorado and just learning more about him, he seems like he just checks so many boxes, has such a high IQ for basketball, like you mentioned, and is going to just like really fit in and mold well with this team and what they look for with, positional versatility, offensive skill set, being able to shoot the ball, and defend. So it's just like, it seems like he like just is a Magic player through and through on many different levels. Speaking of the roster, the Magic are mostly running it back this year. The only few new names are Contavious Caldwell-Pope, the big free agent signing this season. Corey Joseph, veteran point guard, for some depth, and then the rookie Tristan da Silva. Last year, the Magic were an awesome team defensively, like, top 3 the entire season. I think they even finished with 101 rating, which was the second in the league, according to Basketball Reference. Offensively, though, it was a struggle for this team. Like, we know that they turned the ball over a lot. They missed a lot of open shots. Their offense seemed to get stagnated once the initial action would get broken up or disrupted, and then it would just kind of default to isolation. What can happen? What do you think needs to happen this year? How do you think this team, as players and offensively, schematically, how do you think what needs to happen for them to really kind of take that step and get out of the bottom 10 of the offense? They were the 22nd best offense last year, so a bottom 10 for those that need to help with the math there. What's got to happen for them to like at least get up to that league average, outside of just making more shots and not turning the ball over?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, reinforce their strengths. And one of their main strengths, as we know, is getting into the paint and what they do in the paint. Last year, where they were exceptional, was making cuts when the orchestrator or the playmaker was in the paint already, which is a very unique thing. Very few teams are good at slashing or cutting to the basket while the facilitator is already in the paint. Usually the cutters come in while the facilitator is out on the perimeter. The Magic were the best in the league. They took the most shots off cuts when the passer was in the paint. Paolo Banchero is exceptional reading the floor when a guy like Mo Wagner, Franz Wagner, those guys are exceptional cutters. When they come in along the baseline or down the lane, Paolo was able to find them time and time again. Not only did the Magic take the most of those shots, but they were fourth in percentage on those shots. Keep doing that. That's something that is not going to change because the personnel hasn't changed. It's part of their DNA. It's part of their style. Along those lines, the kick-out passing. We've seen this now 5-6 years straight. The best offensive teams in the league are those that generate a lot of open three-point shots off the kickouts from the paint. What we know about the Magic is that they have the playmaking to do it with Paolo, Franz, maybe Anthony Black if he's more in that functional role, Jalen Suggs in circumstances, even Wendell Carter if he's on a short roll, right? Because he's a pretty good roller. When he gets the ball in the middle of the paint, he can find a guy on the perimeter who might be open for 3. Now, last year, the Magic were 20th in kick out from the paint 3-point attempts. That's too low. They were 17th in percentage, though, which is unique because, the Magic collectively 3-point percentage wise were 24th. They made the fewest threes and they were second to last in 3-point attempts in general. But they were 17th in percentage on kick out from the paint threes, which means when they did get those attempts, they were shooting it at a much better clip. So they have to increase those, and I think they will. KCP, although last year with Denver, his highest 3-point percentages were off pull-ups, which is unusual. We know that he's more than capable of knocking down long-distance shots off the kickouts. Denver runs things a little differently with Jokic. They're not as known. Denver was last in the league in 3-point attempts. So they're a unique breed in the way that they play because of Jokic. But with Orlando, I think KCP will really be the beneficiary of the drive and kicks that we see with all the best teams in the league, or most of the best teams in the league. Like I said, Denver's not really known for that, but Milwaukee and Boston, New York. New York's one of the best. From an offensive standpoint, Sacramento is one of the best. So teams like that, the Magic have similar personnel where they can get into the paint and they can locate the shooters on the perimeter. And it's up to the defense. If they're going to collapse on these guys, there's going to be an open shooter here or there. Suggs really benefited off that last year. I was looking at some numbers. What did shock me here. Now, losing Joe Ingles is a little bit of a crusher here because I couldn't believe this. I didn't even realize until I saw the number. He shot 53% off kick out from the paint 3-point attempts, which was like top 10 in the league. Now, he didn't play that many minutes.
Right.
So the number
pretty low volume.
Correct, low volume. But number 2 on this list, key guy here, Jonathan Isaac. He shot 48% from 3 off the kick out from the paint. And number 3 on this list, also a surprise, Anthony Black, 43%. So we're going to see some improvement with the shooting, I believe. KCP, big addition. We're going to keep ramming it into the paint. Defense is going to have to make some key decisions on what they're going to do and how they guard that. But I think 3-point wise, they're going to be a little better than they were last year, if not significantly better. And then finally, to your question, transition scoring. So another really unique thing about the Magic is that they were second in points off turnovers, but they were 27th in fast break points. Normally, if you look at the listing, normally teams that rank high in points off turnovers rank high in fast break points. That's not been the case with Orlando because they want to play more methodical and deliberate in the half court to lower possessions, play deeper into the shot clock, make the defense have to work. I think that this has to kind of be a yin-yang, balance it out type situation. I know Anthony Black talked about this at Summer League. They really want him when he's on the floor to push the pace. I think we're going to see them try and score more on the break and in the open floor, especially when they create turnovers, because that's a much more simplistic way of generating easy scoring opportunities, including from 3. The other guy that I think could really benefit here is Jet Howard if he plays, because what he's really good at is trailing the floor and getting an open 3-point look off those opponent mistakes. He did that in the G League. I think he could do that at the pro level as well. So we know Suggs, the ball hawk, the pressure on the ball, he's going to generate those turnovers. There's enough guys on this team that I think can score with the pace sped up, and I think that'll be an improved area as well.
It's interesting that, we as a team are a team that forces a lot of turnovers for other teams. And, as you were mentioning, wanting to turn those into more fast break opportunities and scoring in transition and things like that. But how does this team, we also generated a ton of turnovers on our own, like our own offensive. We turned the ball over a lot. How does this team get better in that area?
Yeah, I think this is something, a team like the Celtics were working on through the years before they really started to get more advanced in this area as well, is when your primary playmakers are in the front court, it's going to take longer. Paolo's still learning how to be a top-notch playmaker. Franz, the same. This is an unconventional roster in many ways. They're not really rolling out a customary traditional point guard, especially with Markelle Fultz no longer there. Now, of course, there's going to be situations and scenarios where they are going to roll with a more conventional system, but it's very unique when you have 2 6'10" guys like Paolo and Franz orchestrating the offense. But with those growing pains comes mistakes. And, we saw that in the playoff series against Cleveland. Paolo in the first couple games was a little bit out of control, a little reckless, and it led to a lot of mistakes. But as the series went on and he started getting more comfortable, we saw those turnovers come down and just his overall play really exploded. I don't think it'll be much different going into this season. I still am a firm believer that the traditional point guard is an outdated model. You don't need a regular point guard anymore. I'm not saying you don't need someone orchestrating. You obviously do.
Sure.
But we're seeing more and more teams adopt new styles that allow their front court players to handle a lot more of the playmaking load. We see it in Denver with Jokic, Miami with Adebayo, Boston with Tatum, Milwaukee with Giannis, the Lakers with LeBron. These are some of the best teams in the league. Even a team like Golden State, Draymond Green obviously operates a lot. Curry's running around screens. He's not a conventional point guard. It's fine if you want to list him as a point guard because of his size. That is true. But he's not your normal, just bring the ball up, kind of do the normal routine point guard. The style of play is different now than it used to be. And I firmly believe that teams are in their best position when they can have a guy who's 6'9, 6'10, 6'11, 7 feet, who's able to see over defenders, who can operate out of the post, which is something I'd like to see Paolo do more personally, and function from there. Even a guy like Julius Randle with New York. Julius Randle, for he gets some criticism for some of his reckless play. Julius arguably is the best at the kick out from the paint passes. He's a great playmaker. He's got great vision. I see Paolo in a similar mold. So I'm not worried about the turnovers thing. I think this is going to be a disciplined team. I think this is going to be more under control team. And I think it's okay. There's going to be mistakes along the journey, but I like the style and the model that the Magic are incorporating. And I know there's been a lot of talk out there. You got to get a regular point guard. I'm not convinced of that. We'll see. Time will tell if things change. I mean, there are great teams out there that run more traditional systems. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but no longer are the days of the John Stockton Utah Jazz or the Mark Price Cleveland Cavaliers or whatever the case may be. I'm just throwing out randoms, but
Sure. And it's not a surprise because like we've heard Jeff and we've heard Coach Mosley constantly talk about over the last couple of years, they want anyone to be able to initiate the offense, right? And yeah, we do often see the ball get navigated towards Franz or Paulo or even Suggs to kind of be that offensive initiator, but they've just constantly said, we want anyone to be able to initiate the offense if the ball's in their hands. And that kind of goes directly against that more traditional style of point guard that is on the team. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. When someone like Paulo, the face of the franchise, early into the offseason goes on an interview and says, he wants someone to help with that offensive organization, a point guard essentially, and then the team kind of, in my opinion, addresses it by just saying we're going to focus on that by developing internally, right? Was that surprising? Like, I don't know. How do you feel about that whole kind of like comment that he made versus how the team is today?
Yeah, I don't make much of it. Obviously Paolo's learning. And I think that, he's trying to adjust to the speed of the game and learning different trades and the different aspects of the league. So I think he's just got a big view of everything, and things change rapidly.
Right.
My opinion today could change tomorrow, and things are fluid. So I didn't make much of it. I mean, obviously, I think from what I gather, Paolo is very confident in this group and feels like this has the chance to be the makings of a long-term contender for years to come.
Yeah, sorry, and I didn't mean to I wasn't trying to frame that as in Paulo might not have been happy with that. It was just more of a team building, it kind of back to what we were saying just a little bit before. It's the point guard development is coming from within and not bringing an outside person. I think a lot of Magic fans were go get a Tyus Jones or something like that. And it's like when you lose Markelle Fultz, to me, it's signaling, hey, we hear you, Paulo, with wanting more initiation help, and that's going to be done by you developing, by Franz developing, by Suggs developing, by Black and Cole continuing to develop. That's kind of, I think, more or less how I see that, and not. I wasn't trying to imply anything on him being unhappy or anything like that. Yeah. So listeners don't think I was trying to pry Josh into any corner there.
Yeah, no. I think things are done by committee too. I mean, the Celtics thrived at that, last year. I mean, they have two guys who at previous stints been regular point guards in a way. I mean, Derek White and Drew Holiday have had experience playing, normal point guard, but playing in Boston style where Tatum and Brown have the ball as much as they do, they were able to adapt to a new set of functionality. And of course, they were, the Celtics last year were one of the most cohesive teams I've ever seen. And it's the reason why they were the best offense in the league by far and one of the best offenses in league history. So, if you want to use a team to emulate, they're a great example. And to me, they figured it out. I mean, the Celtics are, they've always been one of the smartest groups in figuring out the trends. And how to adapt, and the way that Brad Stevens put that team together was genius. Just
Phenomenal.
a genius, just an incredible architectural job by Brad Stevens and his whole team. So, and I think the Magic are similar. They're built similar. Which is making it really interesting. And I really think the direction could be similar long term, but we'll see. I mean, a lot of these guys have a lot of growing to do, but at least the makeup of the team does seem a little bit, not identical, but it has some commonalities.
Speaking of the makeup of the team, last year's second unit was awesome. They were one of the better second units in the league. They were constantly just putting offensive pressure on teams. You had Kel kind of transition into the second unit last year. You had Joe Ingles and just the whole second unit was awesome. There was a little bit of an up and down season for Cole, but that unit is going to see the most change that it had last year. They're losing two of their primary ball handlers, decision makers, and Joe Ingles and Markelle Fultz. They're no longer with the team. And that's kind of being replaced with, I think one of those is kind of up in the air. Who's going to kind of fill that role where the Joe Ingles role, we know Mo Wagner and Jonathan Isaac are still going to be in the rotation. We know Cole Anthony's still going to be in the rotation. And then it's kind of like, where's that second and third or the last two spots? Who's going to fill it? In my opinion, it's probably going to be our starting shooting guard last year, who is now likely going to be, I'm just going to say likely because we have Caldwell Pope, but Gary Harris probably sliding down into that shooting guard's position in the second unit. How do you kind of see that second unit evolving this year, right? To me, it's a little undecided who's going to kind of play that small forward position. It could be Anthony Black. It could be Tristan Da Silva. It could be Jett Howard. I think there's like a little bit of room for debate there. Really, honestly, it might be none of them, and it might just be Coach, rotating Franz and Paulo in and doing some staggering with that unit. Not exactly sure how that's going to fill out, but like, how do you kind of see that unit playing? Because to me, when I see it, I think there might be a little bit of growing pains with this unit. They might kind of have to take a step back initially to eventually take a longer step forward with just losing some of that veteran decision-making presence. I mean, Gary Harris can handle the ball a little bit, but he's not necessarily known as like a playmaker, an organizer. And I know I'm saying all this right after we just talk about how this team is free-flowing and wanting to be able to have like anyone initiate the ball and things like that. But what are your thoughts around the second unit right now?
Yeah, what we know from last year is that the second unit, oddly enough, was one of the best offensive second units in the league as opposed to necessarily defensively, even though they have a guy like Jonathan Isaac coming off the bench. But, he didn't play maybe in enough games for that to, generate as far as the statistics. But offensively, this was almost an elite second unit, which is unusual considering altogether they were not known for their offense. But Cole Anthony, we know, has been inconsistent, but he gets off to great starts, kind of tails off a little bit toward the end, but he's always going to be a key figure. And then, you mentioned him, but Anthony Black to me is probably at the center of all of it. I feel like, well, first off, going back to the defense, I'm a firm believer. I believe AB might very well be pound for pound the best defensive guard in the league right now. In his time on the floor last year, he was spectacular defensively. His length, his technique, his instincts, his anticipation are all elite. We talked about him as well as far as the spot-up shooting being better than advertised. So that was promising as well. Now at Summer League, he got more of a taste playing more traditional point guard. I don't know what the role is going to be for him going forward, but what I gather from him is that he's comfortable being plugged into different situations, and I think he is confident being a supplementary piece if he's playing off the ball, but I also think he's a guy that can orchestrate just enough to calm the team down when the opposing team goes on a run. I do think we're going to see him push the pace more when he's on the floor. I think that's something that Coach Mosley is asking of him. And if he's not on the floor with Paolo and Franz, I think we will see his basketball IQ raised, and I think he'll make really good decisions with the ball in his hands. I also would like to see him more, if he is operating with the ball, get into the post, because his size could be very overwhelming for a lot of second unit guard opponents. We saw it a little bit at Summer League, him do it. This is also somebody that's not afraid of contact. One of his strengths at Arkansas was drawing fouls. He has size. I think he's added. I think he said at Summer League, and now it's already like 2 months since then. But I think he added 15 pounds of muscle, 10 pounds,
Wow.
15 pounds of muscle. Yeah, he's a stronger player than he was last year from an overall physicality standpoint. I believe, obviously, if he gets the playing time, if he gets the opportunity, I'd like to see him go to work more down near the basket when he has the opportunity against smaller defenders, because I think he can draw contact, get to the free throw line, and operate with his back to the basket, which of course is a little less common in today's NBA. So he's a central figure. And then, yeah, the young guys overall, I mean, De Silva and Howard, how are they going to be plugged in? Those are big question marks. And then we know if Isaac's healthy, we know the impact he makes defensively. But like I said earlier, his spot up shooting was a lot better than maybe many people realized. And I know it tailed off a little bit in the playoff series against the Cavs, but I think they'll be just fine. And now they're just more seasoned, more experienced. Maybe Corey Joseph can help in that area as well. But that's pretty much the way I would sum that up. It's blurry right now.
Yeah.
Obviously once training camp gets going and preseason games gets going, we'll have a better feel for it. But those young guys to me are at the center of how that second unit kind of meshes and, forms together. It's just it's too ambiguous right now to feel like there's a conclusive answer to those questions. But
Sure.
That's the way I kind of see it.
No, and I think that's a question. It makes sense because we've all been asking and talking about that the second unit like all offseason. What does it look like? There was that had the most dynamic movement this offseason, and it's pretty clear that these younger guys, a couple of them are going to have larger roles than they've had in the past, and that's puts some questions. How will they respond? Right. I'm pretty high on our development staff. I think they will respond well. We do tend to draft guys that are high IQ and won't necessarily shy away from the added responsibilities. Granted, there might be some growing pains in there with it, but that is okay. And so it's just interesting to think about how that unit is going to come together. And I'm really excited, particularly when we see preseason and into the early games of the regular season, how that works out. Again, I expect some staggering here and there with the starters to kind of make some blends there and give it a little bit more of a balance, but it'll be interesting. We've brought up his name a couple of times, so I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. I had this comment: who will be the Magic's X factor, and why is it Jonathan Isaac? He was one of the X factors last year for this team's success, their defensive identity. He had one of his most successful seasons since being in the NBA, particularly in recent years with all of his injuries and rehabs that he's worked really hard to get to where he was at this past year. And this summer is even different than last summer because this was his very first actual fully healthy offseason. Most people may or may not remember, but like at the end of last year, he had a minor surgery to kind of clean up some things in his knees. I don't think it was a major recovery process, but probably like a month-ish of like kind of figuring out his knee before he could go like really full at it, if I'm speculating a little bit on some behind the scenes things. But this season, it doesn't sound like he's had any setbacks in this offseason and has just been able to focus on basketball. Have you had any conversations with him this offseason? And if not, just how do you think this is going to affect him going into next season, like particularly on the offensive side? We know defensively he's going to be a beast, right? That's not going to change. And offensively, you mentioned he's had some very impressive catch and shoot numbers off kickouts. But we all have seen flashes and more of his game. So how do you think actually having this offseason is going to help affect him going forward and how that could be integrated with the team?
Yeah, everything I've heard is that he's in maybe the best mental space that he's been since he came into the NBA. I think he's gained full confidence in the medical staff for getting him to where he is now. Credit to Arnie and all those others who work under that umbrella, who have done an amazing job, not just with him, but the entire roster, and keeping them not only healthy overall, but keeping their minds right, keeping them in a good headspace. And I think he's kind of at the top of that list as far as somebody that could have easily just thrown in the towel. I mean, I think some people thought he was going to, and then he just kind of rebounded in a way where it's becoming maybe a 30 for 30 at some point down the road. I could see that with a player like him, with all that he's been through. But yeah, I mean, we mentioned some of the basketball stuff, and the one thing staying on basketball stuff, the thing about Isaac is that if he's playing big minutes, he's a guaranteed all defensive team player. Whether it's first team or second team is arguable and really almost indifferent in the discussion. But all the best teams for the most part have someone that you can rely on in one-on-one isolation defensive situations. We see that across the board. Minnesota with Jaden McDaniels, right? I mean, someone who can lock down players from all different positions. He's done that routinely. You can go different position to position, but in my opinion, and all the advanced analytics say this, it's almost impossible. Drew Holiday maybe is the one exception, but it is almost impossible based on numbers for anyone under 6'8", maybe even 6'9", to be part of the best defensive class category. No disrespect to the great guard defenders. Of course, the Magic have a few, and I don't want to dismiss all that they do. But what I'm saying is, when you look at some of these deeper numbers, it shows that it's the guys with the greatest length and the greatest instincts at their size that make the biggest impact. Isaac being probably at the top of that list. Wembanyama is an obvious one. I mentioned Jaden McDaniels, Herb Jones, OG Anunoby. These are just a few that you see it game after game after game. They're guarding not only the other team's best players, but players from different positions and with different skill sets. Jaden McDaniels, for example, I'm using him because he's a little bit of an Isaac comp in ways. Jaden McDaniels is one of the best at ball hawking up the floor. I mean, if you look at his numbers, he's someone that can, keep pace with an opposing point guard in the backcourt and just stick with him the whole way through, and he tires out his opponents, kind of like how Suggs does. And McDaniels, obviously, with more length, can do it at just an intense level. I could see Isaac doing something like that. I mean, Isaac could probably do anything defensively. If you need him to be in that kind of role and do that kind of function, he'd probably thrive at it. He could tire out opponents from all positions. So this is a point that I wanted to make about Isaac, is that his value, I don't think numbers quite quantify just how imperative a player like him is in the league today. The guys at his size who defend the way that they do, they are irreplaceable, really. I mean, you need someone like that on your team, at least someone at a well above average category. I mean, you look at the best teams, they generally have it. And you can go down the list, from team to team, and you feel like they have somebody you can rely on in those situations. But Isaac is one of those guys. And then offensively, he's never going to be asked to do that much. So hit the spot up shots occasionally. If he has a smaller defender on him, hit or turnaround jumper here and there, rebounding. He's a really good rebounder. And, the Magic last year were one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the league. They could become one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league, and maybe he could score more on putbacks, things of that nature. But he could dabble in a lot of different areas to make an impact besides what he does defensively. And, spot up shooting, rebounding, and then occasionally, if he's in the post or whatever the case may be, or if he's up against a smaller defender, I think he can really use his size to his advantage in that scenario. And he's done it, and he'll continue to do it.
He's a pretty good cutter too. He does make smart decisions on when to cut and, go for a layup or a lob or something like that. And it's cool because, we've seen some flashes of him doing a couple little like 1-2 pull-up moves and having some nice shots. And I think we often want to see that evolve a little bit more because we saw it in some earlier of his seasons, and then we've seen it a little bit last year too. And you're right, he probably is going to be more of a play finisher than a starter initiator or something like that. And that's great because his calling card is defense. And I always mentioned back when he was struggling with injuries and whatnot, knock on wood, that he continues to stay healthy. But when some fans might get frustrated and just say, oh, we should just trade him. Like, guys, I understand you're frustrated, but there's going to be 28, 29 other teams that will call and at least ask for information on him and see what the potential trade might look like, because these types of players don't grow on trees and they're invaluable. And, then you look at him as a person and how he's connected to all the teammates and, one of the leaders on the team. I don't know if he did anything this summer, and maybe it was 2 summers ago, but like he organized a team training camp in South Carolina and stuff like that. And so it's like, he's a special player on and off the court. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun season to just continue to watch him, see if his minutes increase, to see how he gets a little bit more involved, offensively, whether it's the same type of role or just maybe increased a hair. I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting. I started off that initial question with asking who will be the Magic's X factor. And then I just said, why is it Jonathan Isaac? Do you have someone else that kind of fits that, media stereotypical question X factor that has zero definition around it? But do you have someone when that question is asked that you like to think of outside of Jonathan Isaac?
The first guy that popped into mind with the question actually was KCP. He's the newest player on the team, or one of the newest players technically, so that would be an obvious reason why. But not just because of what he's done with his prior teams, but the things that he brings to the table, which might be very rudimentary on the surface level stuff, could change the trajectory of the team going forward. Because we already talked about what their weaknesses were, what their weaknesses were and what their strengths were. Well, he fortifies one of their main strengths. He gives them another incredible on-ball defender. A lot of people dismiss this. I said this. I think I said this on maybe another podcast earlier in the summer. I don't know how he didn't make an all-defensive team. It baffles me just looking through all the different numbers and even the eye test. To me, there was no doubt in my mind I thought he should have been all-defensive first team, let alone just making a team in general. I mean, he ranked number 1 in opponent field goal percentage with the contest. So we know that he has the full package: size, instincts, anticipation, technique, balance, coordination, the whole package to guard a number of different players. I look at the list of guys that he guarded last year. It was basically all the other team's best players. I mean, he was guarding Steph Curry sometimes, Devin Booker, across the board in terms of 1, 2s, and 3s. And he did a great job on all of them. Tatum occasionally. I mean, it was impressive just how he did against so many of the team's best players. And then those final numbers, when they were unveiled, showed exactly that. I mean, his defensive field goal percentage, his contesting percentage, he did a pretty good job not fouling. He doesn't foul much when, or I should say, what I meant to say with that was, when he fouls, very infrequently does the other player make the shot with the foul, which I think is it's an underrated detail.
Yeah.
So he's a hard fouler. He's a physical player. So I think that is a key detail about him. And yes, the Magic were already great defensively before him, but they should be even better now with him. There's no reason to not keep adding top tier talent regardless of what their strengths are. So I think he makes them even better on that end. And then we talked about, the kick out shooting and all that. I think he's a guy that he's played in such huge games over the last several years. And the one thing the Magic really suffered at last year offensively, mainly, they were not great in the clutch offensively. I want to say they shot 22% from 3 in the clutch, and were one of the bottom 10 teams in overall percentage in clutch situations. Paolo was good in those situations, particularly the first half of the year, and others didn't quite hit the marks. I think KCP is a guy that you can rely on in a big moment. I'm not saying he's not going to be an initiator, he's not going to be a creator, but if the ball ends up in his hands with the game on the line, or just in the last couple minutes and the score is close, I firmly believe you can trust him to make the right decision, or just simply make the big shot. I just, he's obviously played in multiple NBA finals and
Yeah.
big playoff games and all that. I just think that makes a difference. And I don't know. There's just he has something about him. You could just his presentation, his style of play. He has a almost like a silent confidence about him. We'll have to see what it's like up close now that he's part of the Magic. But the vibe I've always got from him is he doesn't back down from pressure situations, and maybe that's a reason why he's been a key component, a key cog on championship teams. He just makes the right plays in the big moments.
It's funny that we have like hardly touched on him on this whole podcast until now, because I think he is a huge addition to this team, and similar type of player in Gary Harris to an extent, but better, better shooter, better defender. And but I think like when you look back at the last couple of seasons, it's like, last year, the addition of Joe Ingles, he was the veteran that team needed in that moment, right? Someone who's had a lot of playing time, played in a lot of playoff series with some very competitive teams, and a very good communicator. And that, like the coach on and off the court type of thing. There were so many times we'd see him, talking to a player off the court, in the middle, like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what we need to be doing, blah, blah, blah. As Coach Mosley was also talking to other players during timeouts and things like that. And then obviously he was a very verbal communicator on the floor as well. And that's what the team needed in that moment. And now, okay, cool. This team has different expectations. They're trying to take that next step in postseason competitiveness. Oh, cool. Now we have a guy who is still in his prime, who's been a starter on 2 championship teams, and fits the identity of this team, defensive first, and helps improve a weakness with shooting. It's just going to be really exciting to kind of just see how that relationship fits, to watch him and Jalen just kind of go after people defensively, like maybe even taking a hair of defensive pressure off of Jalen, which will be interesting. On my last episode, Philip Rossman Reich on, and we talked all about the relationship of KCP and Suggs and how there's going to be some developmental things that could happen with Suggs because of KCP standing right next to him. And I think that'll be really interesting. But yeah, I think that's a great, maybe I should have also said him as an X factor instead of Jonathan Isaac, but I don't think you can really go wrong with either one of those.
A number of guys, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want to back out. We only have a couple minutes left, so I want to take a little bit of a broader look instead of focusing so much on like an individual or a couple players type of look. Last year was the big year. Like, we kind of, I think, all thought the expectations of the season was, okay, let's just make the play-in and have a competitive series. Maybe we can win the play-in and get a playoff berth. And then we had to adjust our expectations as the team pretty early into the season started beating our expectations. And so we all just, cool, you make the playoffs. And then at one point it was, can they get home court advantage? Like, we had to constantly reevaluate our expectations for this Magic roster last year. And there was some luck along the way, right? Like there may or may not be this year with some injuries to like, Joel Embiid and stuff like that. Where do you think the Magic should lay their expectations going into the 2024-25 NBA season?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to build from where you left off the prior year. So they made a game 7 of the first round last year. So I don't know if it's as simple as saying you got to get past that, because that would obviously insinuate winning a first round playoff series. And then from there, I'm not going to say it's house money from there, but obviously I think based on the youth of the team still and the fact that so many of these players are still growing, I think we probably would feel that way by the end of the season. If that's what were to happen, we'd probably like, okay, well, if you get past the first round, then it's like everything else is bonus time. We'll see how we feel at that point.
Sure.
The East is interesting now because you have the haves and the have-nots, it seems. I mean, I'm not going to say the playoff teams are set, but doesn't it kind of feel like they are? I mean, things can change. Teams can make trades. Injuries happen. But you look at the list, and it feels already like you have 8 teams, 7, 8, that are like, okay, they have to make the playoffs, right? And then everybody else, it's like, I don't know if I could see them making the playoffs. So is that what the kind of position we're in now with this conference? Because we know about Boston and New York and Milwaukee, if you want to include teams like Miami, Indiana, Philadelphia, of course, with Paul George, it just feels like, Orlando's in that category where you have those, what did I list there? Eight. I want to say 8 teams. So it's like, is that the playoff field already? I mean, it feels that way.
Didn't even say Cleveland. The guys we just no. I mean, but I'm just adding it. That's how like the East has gotten. The bottom of the East is like very weak, but the not once you get outside of those guys, it's like it's a pretty thick like 8. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's and I think it's getting to the point where I don't know if we can right now say this is what the order should be.
Sure.
Like this, I mean, if you want to say Boston won, that's fine, and I think it very well could end up that way. I mean, Miami seems you never want to rule Miami out. I don't even want to say it because we've seen this time and time again. You say, this is not their year, and then this is the year they finally they kind of emerge again. They have a great year, then an okay year, and then they have a great year again, and that might happen again. So you got to include them in the whole conversation, but I could see any of those 7, 8. We say we had 8, right? Cleveland made it 8, right?
Yeah.
Any of those 8 teams, I could see being the top seed in the East. I could. I think there's maybe an outside chance for some of them, but you can include Orlando in there. I mean, I'm not saying that's my projection. I mean, who knows? But I think it's fair game to say that any of those 8 teams could ultimately walk away from the regular season as the top seed in the Eastern Conference. I think there's a chance for all of those teams. Boston with the most likely, probably New York and Philadelphia are right there.
Health luck needs to go into all of it too.
And then Milwaukee kind of the same, and Orlando, Cleveland, Miami, Indiana, right? Those are the 8. So I could see it. I could see any of them really. Maybe I'd say, again, dare I say it, but I'd say probably Miami would be the least likely of them. But
sure.
Who knows? So that would be my way of answering that.
And then to kind of like wrap up this conversation, this awesome conversation we've been having again. Thank you for taking the time. Last year was the first time in a very long time since 2020 that the Magic made the playoffs, and the first time with this group, right? And by far the most successful playoffs we've had since the Dwight years. So what do you think were some of the lessons that this team learned and can take away from that season to come in better prepared this year, and how to better navigate the ups and downs getting into the regular season, going into the postseason?
Well, they talked about this right after last season ended, and I thought it was a home run point, and it really needed to be addressed. I mean, every season is different and every playoff series is different. But what we saw in the Orlando-Cleveland series is maybe what this team needed to understand how every single regular season game is important. I don't know how many times people will say, oh, it's just a regular season. Who cares what happens on January 16th in Charlotte or in Chicago or whatever. One game could be the difference between having that home court advantage and not. And the way the Magic play at home, and I don't think it's going to change at all, Kia Center has easily become one of the best home courts in the entire league. I don't care what anyone says. I've been to a lot of them. It is phenomenal, and it showed in the playoffs. It'll show again this year. The higher the seed the Magic have, the greater it's stating the obvious. We all know that teams that go far in the playoffs typically have higher seeds. The only way to get a higher seed is to play well in the regular season. The better you play in the regular season, the automatic higher seed you get. It's stating the obvious. It should be stating the obvious. And I don't want to sound so cliche about it, but like every game should be taken just as seriously as the next or the one before that. Like, I don't care who they're playing. Just win as many games against every opponent you can and let the chips fall where they may. I think they learned that don't take your foot off the gas against any opponent. Now, they played well at home against bad teams last year, but they stumbled against those same teams sometimes on the road. They got to take that juice with them when they head out and travel. There was that loss in Charlotte late in the year that really turned out to be incredibly costly. I mean, if they won that game, they probably would have had home court in the first round and probably would have beaten Cleveland or any other team, whoever they would have played in the first round.
That game and the Rockets game.
The Rockets game was the other one I was going to mention. Like, these are critical games. I expect him to once again have a great home record. Can they now find just enough juice on the road to improve their road record? They were okay on the road. They won some really good games. They beat
did.
Minnesota in Minnesota last year. They beat, and now the Knicks did not have Jalen Brunson that game, but they beat New York in New York. They had some nice wins last year on the road. I think it'll be important though to get a few more of them and to make sure they don't lose to bad teams on the road. That to me is a key, because if they don't stumble in those situations, I think it's very, very possible, maybe even likely, that they'll be top 4 in the conference. And if they do that, they'll be in good position to get out of the first round.
I love it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing just how that all evolves, because I mean, like, you really do learn a lot through your first really hard experience in something, right? And for our conversation, that's basketball going to the playoffs, and getting to a game 7. And so when you think about these young players, just Franz, okay, I had a pretty good season, but a pretty up and down playoffs to an extent in certain areas, and my shooting was a little up and down. Like, how mentally can I put myself in a better situation to be more consistent in those areas? Paulo, same type of thing. Okay, how can I learn to take care of my shot selection to be a little bit more efficient? Cole Anthony, the list goes on and on, how much these little things that they went through last year could really polish these players up in a lot of ways. Not even on the court, but just the mentality going into every single game, so they don't kind of take the brakes off the gas. Because we both mentioned the Charlotte and the Rockets game, but those don't matter if they win a couple of those easier games that they were supposed to in the earlier part of the season too, right? And so it's like, yeah, those stick out because they were the part of the last 10 of the game, and we were in the season, we were really fighting for positioning. But you take care of a couple other games earlier in the season, you might not be in that situation. So it's like they got to lock in mentally. And I think they will. And I think adding a veteran like, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and even Corey Joseph to an extent, he's had a lot of playoff experience too. Like, those types of things, and the playoff experience they just gained is going to really benefit this team. So, Josh, I really want to thank you for joining us. We've been talking for 53 minutes, and it's been a pleasure every step of the way. You've been coming on my podcast once or twice a season now for a few years now. It's always an enlightening conversation, and I look forward to having you on a little bit into the regular season when we can just kind of like look back at what we just talked about today and kind of like, hey, all right, so how did this play out? How is the team doing? So that'll be a lot of fun.
Sure.
Josh, go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you. And if you have anything you want to plug, you're welcome to mention that now as well.
Yeah, once again, thanks for having me on, Stephen. Always appreciate it. My Twitter /X, whatever we're calling it these days, Josh_Cohen_NBA. I have a YouTube channel with the same name. You can also find my articles on OrlandoMagic.com.
Awesome. Magic fans, make sure you tune into everything Josh is doing. His content is honestly really, really good. You will learn by reading his stuff. If you want to understand basketball better, just read it. It's not just a game breakdown. It's very good. YouTube channel as well. And thank you for tuning into another episode of The Close Up. Thanks again, Josh. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.